I'm Karen, and I have never attempted to batch cook Instapot meals before. And actually, I've never batch cooked more than like 4 meals at one time before. And the only time I've ever done it, they were things that we baked in the oven. But because I use my Instant Pot for cooking all the time and it is so convenient for me, I decided that it would be so much easier if I pre-made some of the meals that I could just pop into the Instant Pot on nights that I did not want to have to think about what we were going to eat. And one of the cool features about Instant Pot is that you do not have to worry about thawing things ahead of time. So I can just take these things out of the freezer, pop them in the pot, and go. So I found a website that had directions for regular how to make the recipe, but then it all had alternate directions for if you wanted to make the recipe ahead and then freeze it, and then how to cook it on the day that you wanted to cook it. So I went through, I do my own meal planning, and so I went through and picked out the recipes that I wanted to do. Originally had picked out 15 and then realized that one of them really wasn't going to work for freezing. So, so tonight I'm going to make 14 recipes, and which is really ambitious, but 2 weeks worth of meals so that I do not have to think about what we're going to eat. I can come home, grab something, and for the directions on these things, what you have to do is when you take it out of the freezer, you take it out of the packaging that you've frozen it in, either a disposable container or in a Ziploc bag, as long as it's frozen in a shape that will fit into your pot. And then basically you saute for 5 minutes just to get it going, thawed out a little bit. And then you seal up your pot and cook it for however many minutes the directions say. So what we're going to do is go ahead and prepare all of the ingredients. I will video all the different segments for preparing each meal, but also some of the things will be prepared together. So several of the recipes take chicken that needs to be sauteed. So rather than doing each meal, we're going to do all the chicken at one time, all the ground beef at one time, cutting up all the carrots together, cutting up all the onions together, so you get the picture. When you do batch cooking, that's the way you want to do it, because otherwise you're taking even longer. You cannot prepare one meal at a time, or I'd be preparing meals all day long if I was doing 14. I will say that I am not a fast cook. And part of that is because some of the things that people do use normally that are conveniences, I choose not to use because of how they're made. So for example, a lot of people buy their garlic already minced in a jar. And I don't do that because there are additives in there. And so I mince my own garlic. Shredded cheese. I don't buy shredded cheese because there are additives in there, and so I shred my own cheese. And so it's things like that. I do buy, like the tomatoes, you'll see, I'm going to use canned tomatoes, but I use organic. Canned beans, I'll use organic canned beans. So I try and take those shortcuts rather than having to cut up tomatoes, soak beans overnight, and those kinds of things. I'm gonna apologize in advance for probably not doing a great job of staying in the video all the time, because I've never actually made a video before of myself doing things, and having video across the room makes it a little difficult to see where I am in the picture. I'm also not going to be looking at the video the whole time because I need to be watching myself doing things. I will try and explain what I'm doing. One important thing that I kind of think of is we're going to be cooking lots of different things, touching lots of different things. So washing hands in between all those things is really, really important. You probably all know that, but you know, you're going from chicken and you're touching seasonings and things like that. So you don't want to spread all those germs. So you'll probably see me wash my hands like 5,000 times. When I finish with everything, I'll edit together the videos because I'll try and cut out the most boring parts, and also may have to cut out children coming in and bothering me, or making a lot of noise. So feel free to leave comments, questions, and I will do my best to answer. I will also post all of the names of the recipes that I did and where you can find the full recipe below. Two of the recipes call for ground beef, and for those recipes, the ground beef already needs to be cooked. So we're going to use the saute function on the Instapot to go ahead and cook our ground beef. And because I use very lean ground beef, I'm going to have to use a little tiny bit of olive oil to keep it from burning to the bottom. I try and do as many things in the pot as possible without using extra pans and pots, so that there's much less cleanup. That's one of the benefits of having the Instapot. So we're gonna brown our ground beef, and actually that's 4 pounds of ground beef that I'm browning. That's 2, and the other. While that's going, another recipe calls for cooked rice. It calls for white rice, but I don't use white rice. I use brown rice. To save yourself some trouble, instead of using a pot to cook brown rice, that would take 45 minutes. In an Instapot, it takes 15 minutes. So I'm going to, in my other pot, I'm going to go ahead and do the brown rice. Now, one of the things, the reason I have 2 pots is because I do not like to mix, like this one is for things that do not have seasonings in it. So I make yogurt in this pot, I make rice, I make macaroni and cheese, things that don't have like chili powder, cumin, other seasonings that are gonna flavor the pot or the ring. And my big pot is where I make chili and other seasoned items. A lot of people buy an extra ring for their pot and just switch out their rings, but I still can smell it, so I just bought a second pot. Besides the fact that I can cook multiple things at one time if I do that. So measure out my rice. And pour out my water. And for brown rice in the Instant Pot, it's equal parts of water and rice. And there's the clip. So 1 cup of rice and 1 cup of water. And stir my ground beef. And then I'm going to put the lid on my pot. When you hear that noise, you know that you've got, well, maybe you know you have the lid on right. And then you turn it. Make sure that your vent is sealed, so you turn it to the left. And then you're going to hit manual. It does have a rice button, but I do not use the rice button because I want to set it for a certain amount that is appropriate for the brown rice. So I'm going to hit manual and do 15 minutes. Now, if you like your rice a little softer, then you would go maybe to 17 minutes. I do 15 because also this is going into another dish, and so it's actually going to get cooked a little bit more later. So I have a very picky eater, as I'm sure some of you do, who will not eat something if it has big chunks of vegetables. So what I usually do for onions and celery, and if anything had bell peppers, I would do the same thing with that, is I do those in my food processor. So all of the recipes that have onions and celeries, I went ahead and added up the number of onions and the number of stalks of celery that I was going to need, and I am going to go ahead and do all of those in my food processor at one time so that I can then just divide out how many I need for each recipe rather than doing them one at a time. That's part of when you're doing large numbers of meals at once. You don't want to do one recipe at a time or it's going to take you a lot longer. So I had, I think, 5 recipes that called for onions. So it may have been more. So I am putting 6 onions, no, it must have been more, 6 onions into the food processor. So there were at least 6 recipes that called for onions. Maybe 7 because one of them pretty much only called for half. So I can't fit all 6 in there at once. So I'm going to use some of them. And I have to make them pretty small or she'll know they're in there. And then she won't eat it. And actually I forgot to get my bowl. So I will get a bowl, and I'm just going to put them all into one bowl for right now, and as I get to each recipe I will measure out how many I need. If you are used to cooking, you can kind of tell about how much onion equals 1 onion. So if the recipe called for 1 onion, then you'll know kind of how much you need. Some of these call for actual measurements, like a half a cup of onion. So that's what I'll do for those. So that's what I'm doing with the onions and the celery. Okay, so our rice is finished, and because this recipe is a quick pressure release, I'm going to show you what that means. You want to move it away from your cabinets so the steam doesn't blow up onto your cabinets, and you're going to flip your vent and back up. And some people turn it around so that the steam is definitely blowing away from your cabinet. And because it was just a small amount, this is actually releasing pressure kind of fast, so I'll have to check and make sure that it's really done. So, turn it back around, and we're gonna slowly open it up and give it a second. And then I should be able to pull it open. And it is. It's perfectly done. There are a few more ingredients that need to be pre-cooked before we put together the things we're going to freeze. And so I'm actually going to do them all at one time. I am going to use one pan, and that is going to be to cook the steak that we're going to put into the Instapot country steak. And then the rest of it is going to be chicken, and all of those things are going to be cooked in these two Instapots. And because I'm not seasoning them with anything except for salt and pepper, I'm actually going to use both pots because it won't season my pan at all. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in both pots and turn them both to saute mode. And I'm going to get the salt and pepper. And salt and pepper, all of them. I've already prepared the chicken ahead of time. The recipes called for different cuts for the chicken, so I went ahead and cut them in all the different ways. And then we will start browning the chicken. So with meat in an Instapot, even though we're not actually fully cooking these today, we're gonna freeze them. Anytime you're going to cook meat in an Instapot, you want to sear your meat first. Except for, we do have a few cuts that we're not gonna do that with today because they're gonna be down in a lot of liquid. So those will be okay. But normally you would sear your meat first. Or with ground beef, of course, you're gonna brown that. Okay, so while the chicken is cooking, I'm going to also brown the steak. And I use whole wheat flour and olive oil rather than using white flour. I use white wheat flour just because I like the flavor of it better, but it is still whole grain flour. And I use olive oil rather than vegetable oil for health reasons. Feel like it's healthier for you than using vegetable oil. So I'm going to go ahead and get that going and then check on the chicken. So I've flipped over my chicken, and so now I'm going to do salt and pepper on the other side. And these are the cut up pieces of chicken, so I'm going to go ahead and stir those around. And then this meat, I'm going to check it, and we need a little tiny bit more olive oil. Not quite enough in there. these pieces of chicken are ready, so I'm going to go ahead and take them out. They don't have to be fully cooked, just brown, because they're going to get cooked again when we take these freezer meals back out. Flip these pieces of steak. They're looking fabulous. And go ahead and put in your other pieces of chicken that are left. So the next step is going to be to cut up all of the carrots. And based on all of the recipes that require carrots, it looks like we need 6. Some of them require a certain number of carrots and some require a measurement. So 4, 5, 6, and actually we only have 7, so we're going to go ahead and cut them all up. And let me rinse them first. So now that we've got that, I'm gonna cut those up. And most of them they called for dicing the carrots, and so I'm going to show you in a second what I'm going to use to do that, to make it a little easier on me. So this is what I use. It's a Pampered Chef chopper. And I know there's other brands that make the same thing, and there may be a better way to do it, but I'm not going to stand here and chop them by hand because that would take too long. This is a folding table, so I'm actually going to move it to the counter because it would make a lot of noise and take longer. So I do that a few times and they're chopped, and I need a bowl. So I dump those in the bowl and get the next set. Just stack as many as you can fit in there. One of the recipes calls for a sweet potato, and what it requires, let's look, make sure I do it right, is to peel and dice. So that one I'm going to do by hand. So first wash it off. So got that. I cannot find my favorite peeler, so I'm going to attempt to use my husband's potato peeler that I hate. Ugh. And I'm supposed to have 1 1/3 of a cup, so I just bought a really big sweet potato so that I'd make sure I had enough. Hate it. All right, so I've got it peeled, and then I'm just going to cut off the very ends, and then it says diced, so cut it into some slices, maybe about this thick, and then I kind of cut it up into cubes. because this is going to go into the pot with some other things. You don't want to cut it up too small because otherwise you're going to have sweet potato mush. We also have a butternut squash to cut up for that recipe. We need 6 1/3 cups for that, so that's why I bought a big butternut squash. Can't get the sticker off. There we go. So, I'm gonna rinse that. And then work on peeling it. Never actually peeled the butternut squash. Okay, now that it's peeled, I'm gonna cut the ends off, top and the bottom, which can be difficult. In the middle you are going to have seeds, so after you cut it up you're going to want to get those out. So I kind of cut it in slices and then cut the middle out. There may be a better way to do it, but that's how I do it. So this is what the center of it looks like. So I kind of cut it in half like this, and then just take the center part out because you're dicing it anyway, so you can cut around it. This part is the part that takes the longest. Cut it up into cubes like this, about the same size as your sweet potato, and then set it to the side. Okay, we are ready to start assembling things now that we have prepped just about everything. So I have 15 different recipes. Actually it's 14, but one of them I doubled. And what we're gonna do is put them into Ziploc bags and freeze them. And so the first one is chicken, sweet potato, and butternut squash. So all you have to do is, some people use disposable containers and freeze, and you need to find a container that is the right size for your pot. I have an 8-quart, so it would need to be something that is the right shape and size to fit inside your pot. If you have a 6-quart, you need a smaller one. A gallon-sized Ziploc bag will fit inside mine. The only thing about this recipe is it has a lot of stuff, so I'm really gonna have to use 2 bags for this one. Some of the other recipes should all fit in one bag. So you're going to need a way to label, which I didn't get ahead of time. All right, so have a Sharpie, and I'm going to label it chicken, sweet potato, and butternut squash. And I'm also going to put the date. That way you know about how long your food has been in the freezer. And so this tells me that I should put the sweet potatoes and the squash in on the bottom, and then put the other ingredients on top of that, because that's the order you want to put it in your pot. So we're gonna see how much will fit. All right, so the next thing it tells me to put in, I might actually fit it all in one, is to layer everything else. So I have my pound of quarter chicken. Let's come over here and grab that. That is what we cooked earlier. It's not completely cooked, but we did brown it to where it's mostly cooked. And actually, I got one of the pieces mixed up, so let's switch that out. So we're gonna put 1 cup. And then 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. I don't use garlic out of a jar. I always use fresh. So I'm gonna mince that myself. I don't, oops, that one went in the trash. I also don't do that by cutting it. I have a garlic press, so it should only take a second. Throw a couple of, there goes another one. A couple of cloves in here. That's about 1 teaspoon. And there's another one. Let's pick that up and get another one. Clean that off later. All right, so I don't believe that. I think you always need extra garlic. So I will do a little bit more. Now we need 1/3 of a cup, 1/3 of a cup of parsley, except for I don't usually do fresh parsley just because keeping what's left is a pain. So I will not do 1/3 of a cup because I'm using dried. So I also don't always measure everything. So I'm going to sprinkle some in here. Not quite 1/3 of a cup. And then some basil. Same thing for that. Where's the basil? There it is. Because that's not fresh, I'm not going to use a full 1/3 of a cup. An 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. So, and also requires some pepper. And I'm not going to measure that either because I'm grinding that. And that meal is done. So it actually fit in my bag, amazingly. Let's make sure it fits in my pot. And it does just fine. So this is ready to go. The next one is spaghetti sauce. Let's actually get that out of the way. So we need 2 pounds of ground beef. So earlier we browned 4 pounds. So we're just gonna do half of that. So next is supposed to be 4 cloves of garlic. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Really, to me, I am having trouble with this garlic today. That means like 5 or 6. If it says 4, you need 5 or 6. So, this is the messiest part of putting this together is the garlic. I have to wash my hands when I'm done with this part. Alright, so that's all the garlic. What does it say to do next? Oh, some carrots. So it wants us to put 2 carrots. Of course, remember I chopped them all up and we put them all in one bowl. So we're just gonna estimate how much is 2 carrots worth. So that's about a half a carrot, another half a carrot. This is like grandma's cooking. Another half and another half. So there you have your 2 carrots, and we'll put these back. All right. And now we need celery. Same thing. I mix those up, so we're gonna get a spoon for those. That's 1, 2, 3. That might be enough. All right, next is an onion. So this one called for a large onion. Another spoon. So a large onion might be about 3 spoonsful. Put that over there. Now we need a can of crushed tomatoes, and a can for this is 28 ounces. So I have a big can of no salt added organic crushed tomatoes. Now this counts as a lot of your liquid, so you don't necessarily have to add like water or anything because you just put in liquid. Alright, now we need a tablespoon of olive oil. And you know what, guys? I forgot to write on the bag what it is. So I'll be doing that in a second with the food in the bag. 2 bay leaves, which are right here. Remember, once you've cooked it, to pull your bay leaves back out. Dried oregano, it just says a pinch of oregano, and that would be rosemary, oregano. Just a little sprinkle. Then basil, says a pinch, so a sprinkle of that. A dash of red wine. If I can get it open. Oh. Back on that. Salt and pepper. cup of chicken stock, which of course I just top back on. 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. So we have, this is a half a tablespoon, so do 6 of those. And my favorite, now I have to get it on my finger to get it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. And I got a little ahead of myself a minute ago and went to the soy sauce, so let me finish. So it's supposed to be 2 tablespoons, and I think I already put in a half a tablespoon, so let's finish with 3 more of a half a tablespoon. All right. And then this recipe calls for fish sauce. We're not doing that. And then 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. So, and again, this is a half a tablespoon, so I'm gonna do 1 and 2. Perfect. So that one's done. Okay, next is beef stew. Okay, so for beef stew, we're gonna write on our bag and the first thing that we need is some more carrots. And this time it's asking us to put in 1.5 cups of carrots. So I'm gonna get a 1/2 cup. Easier to fill up this way. I'm trying to use some of the bigger pieces in this one too. 3. All right, next we need some celery. And it asks for 1 cup. So again, now you may want yours diced because that's really how beef stew should be. But my kid would refuse to eat it if it was diced. So it's really more like minced because that's how I'm going to get her to eat the vegetables. Next we have potatoes. Those are diced. Now I need 3/4 of a cup of diced onions. And again, they're not diced. 2/3. So, actually, here we go. 3/4. 3/4 of a cup. Put that right there. Now I need some minced garlic, which means, where did my garlic go? Oh, there it is. A new bulb. It calls for 1.5 teaspoons, which is like 1.5 cloves of garlic. So really that means 3. After I do this, we're gonna do 2¼ teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce. So to try and not make everything just dirty in my house, I will do it 100 times. 1, 2, 3. Next, we need 1/2 teaspoon of thyme. Thyme is right here. Half a teaspoon of basil. A bay leaf. Oh, also pepper. We're gonna toss in the stew beef. Normally, I would brown this first. I've never made this before this way, so we're gonna find out if it comes out tender enough without me doing that. If it doesn't, the next time I would saute this first and then freeze it with all the ingredients, so we'll see. It might be fine because the meat is already cut up very small, so, and we'll see. Tomatoes, 7¼ ounces of diced tomatoes. So I used some of the diced tomatoes have already been measured out for another recipe. So let me measure out and make sure. 7 ounces. I used, okay. It's actually a little more. These in there. Set this to the side in case I need it again. Okay, and now we need beef broth. We need 7 ounces of that. I'll actually go ahead and just use this again. And then salt is over here. And you're supposed to measure that, but I'm not. That's everything for the beef stew. Gluten-free, supposed to be dairy-free chicken ranch soup. Except that mine will have, my ranch has dairy in it. All right, chicken, ranch, and rice soup. So I need a tablespoon of olive oil to start. Have that. Stir that with the olive oil. Let's start with the rice that we cooked. So it called for a half a cup of rice, but because you need a cup of water in your Instapot, and I cooked my rice in the Instapot, I cooked a whole cup of rice. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have a whole cup of rice in our soup, which my family will be happy about. So, but the recipe only calls for a half a cup. Right, then we can go ahead and add 1 tablespoon of olive oil. I may have to add more liquid after I see what's in here. 2/3 of a cup of diced onions. Three-quarters of a cup of carrots. And let me wash out. All right. So 3/4 of a cup of carrots. Then 3/4 of a cup of celery. Okay, then 1.5 teaspoons of minced garlic, which should be, like before, should be 1.5 cloves, but we're gonna do 3. Then is the diced chicken, which I already cooked. So that was the instructions. So good. We're gonna dump that in there. Then they told us to add our rice. but we've already done that. And then we're going to add 4 cups of chicken broth. So I think my extra rice should be fine with all the liquid. That's 2. 3. Okay, and then it calls for 1.5 teaspoons of ranch dressing mix. And of course the recipe calls for dairy-free, but I don't have dairy-free. We don't have anyone in our house that has an issue with dairy, so it's fine for us to use that. So 1, 2, 3. And then we need some sea salt. Some pepper. And the recipe calls for Dijon mustard, but no one in my house likes any recipes with mustard in them, Dijon mustard. So I'm leaving that ingredient out. So this recipe is finished. Okay, so the next recipe is chicken Parmesan. And one of the things I haven't done yet is to shred the cheese. One of my favorite tools in the kitchen is my KitchenAid. I shred so much cheese in this house, and I cannot do it by hand because of how much cheese we use. And so I bought a KitchenAid so that I would not have to shred cheese by hand anymore. And this recipe calls for some shredded Parmesan cheese. So I have put on my attachment so that I can shred that. And all you do is pull this up, put in your cheese, and we'll have to do it twice. Two pounds of chicken breast that we're throwing in the bag. And then we are going to throw in, let's see, it says 2/3 of a cup of Parmesan cheese. So let's find our, and use. I have another recipe that calls for Parmesan, so not all of this goes in there. Here's 1/3 and 2/3. And we'll put this back over here. Then we need 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. All right, so it says 8 teaspoons. We don't really measure our butter in teaspoons, so I'm gonna do 3 tablespoons because that's really like 2.66 32 ounces of tomato sauce. So we've got 15 here. This makes 30. And 2 ounces out of here. We need another spoon. And I'm just gonna estimate this. All right. So now this also requires mozzarella cheese, but you don't do that until when you have cooked it after it's been frozen. So the mozzarella cheese goes on it when it's cooked after having been frozen, so you can just shred that at that time. All right, okay, so our next recipe is chicken taco soup, and for this one we need about 2.5 cups of diced chicken. So I'm gonna dice that real quick, and then we'll be able to throw everything in the bag. This one did not require us to have the chicken cooked ahead of time, but again, like I said with the other one, I don't normally cook meat in my Instant Pot without having sauteed it first, but all of these recipes are new for me, so we're gonna find out if it actually works without having sauteed it. For chicken taco soup, we're gonna throw in 2.5 cups of diced chicken, and then taco seasoning, which will be about, it gave it to me in ounces, but we're going to convert that, and it didn't mean fluid ounces. I think it was doing weight. If we did it by fluid ounces, the whole thing would be taco seasoning. So we are going to do, I think when I did it, it came out to be 2 teaspoons of taco seasoning. We're just going to do that. And this is a half, so 1, 2, 3. No, 1.5 might be enough. Let's do that. 2/3 of a cup of diced onions. And where did my 2/3 go? There it is. Then black beans, which we've already drained and rinsed and put over here. That was just a can of black beans. Then chili beans, it did not tell us to drain those. And I think that's because there's seasoning in the liquid. So we're gonna dump that in there. Then drain diced tomatoes with green chilies. So I already did that. Those are here. Dump those in. And then 5 1/3 ounces of tomato sauce. And that is everything for the chicken taco soup. So you've got another one. Okay, we're gonna make spinach stuffed chicken. And the first thing we have to do is combine spinach, cream cheese, pepper, and garlic salt. And to save me a little bit of time, I use frozen spinach, thawed, and squeeze the excess water out. And we have to combine 2 cups of cream cheese, and I've let it soften so that it's easier to combine. Then 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper and a teaspoon of garlic salt is what we're supposed to be putting in there. Let me wash my hands off. Salt is here, and we're doing 1 teaspoon of garlic salt. All right, so we have to combine this together. The easiest way for me to do that is by hand. It's messy, but it's a lot easier than trying to do it with a spoon. So just stick your hands in it, push it together. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do is we have to butterfly the breasts and put some of the mixture inside. But first I'm gonna wash my hands off. So my chicken breasts are too big for one person to eat. So we usually cut them in half and then butterfly them. So I'll show you in 1 second. So for example, this is 1 chicken breast, enormous. It weighs about 1 pound by itself. So we cut it in half and then butterfly the half, because one person can't eat that whole piece. So, all right, after we get the chicken butterflied, we're gonna put some of this cream cheese and spinach mixture in the center of each one of the pieces of chicken. So I'm gonna stuff it in there like this. Okay. You wait till you see what we're gonna do with it afterwards. So I'm gonna make sure there's a lot in there. By the way, when we put this in the bag, there's not going to be any liquid in it, because when we take this out to cook it in our Instant Pot, we're gonna be putting it in the pot on top of the trivet and putting water in under the trivet. So there will not be liquid in this recipe. This one's different. Okay, so now that we have the chicken breast stuffed, we are going to take and wrap bacon around the chicken breast and then freeze it. So get our slices of bacon here. And wrap it around. And the recipe says to use a pound of bacon, but then it only says something about 1 piece of bacon, but that makes no sense. So we're gonna wrap several slices of bacon around it. And then as you finish each one, go ahead and stick it in your bag. Just be careful so that like your bacon doesn't come off. Once it's frozen, you should be good when you're putting it in the pot. So we have Granny's Italian beef, and we're gonna start by putting in a 2.5 pound beef roast. And like I said, I normally sear meat, so hopefully that's gonna still come out good. It does require a lot longer cooking time than the other recipes that we are doing today. So if for some reason it comes out and it's not as tender, I'll just put it in for longer. Let me wash my hands. So the next thing that goes in is white wine vinegar, and I think I have a bottle this is it, 2 teaspoons of white wine vinegar. And this is a 1/2 teaspoon, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1/4 cup of water. Put this over here. Where are you gonna put? Okay, so we have 1/4 cup of water, then 1 1/3 teaspoon of bouillon. I use Better Than bouillon. Then 2 1/3 teaspoons of minced garlic. So we're gonna do, here's one that we've already used. 1, 2, 3, about 4 cloves of garlic, 1/3 teaspoon of pickling spice. It's something I've never used before, so I had to go buy it. And I do not have 1/3 teaspoon, so we're gonna guesstimate. Where did I put it? There it is. So I have 1/2 teaspoon, so we'll do just a little less. Then, oops, I'm stuck. A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, a bay leaf, and a can of whole tomatoes. And you want to leave the juice so that you have plenty of liquid. And seal it up. And there you have that one. What we're gonna make now is creamy bruschetta chicken. And we're actually gonna make another bruschetta chicken in just a minute, but it's slightly different. So what we have to do is first whisk together some of the wet ingredients and kind of make a marinade, except for we're freezing all of this anyway. So we are going to do minced garlic. It says 2 teaspoons, which is basically 2 cloves, but you know what I said, we have to do extra. So we need at least 3 or 4. And I already have in the bowl sun-dried tomatoes that have been drained. So they were in olive oil and I drained them. The recipe called for half a cup of sun-dried tomatoes that were drained. All right, so that's 2. And then number 3. Y'all, I have used a lot of garlic today. Alright, so next we need 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. And my tablespoon is over here. This one's a half, so we'll just do 4 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. Next is 1/3 cup of olive oil. Where's my 1/3 cup? 1/4, 1/3. Then we're gonna do sea salt. It says half a teaspoon. It's 1/4. So we'll do half. Here we go. Then pepper. I already did the olive oil, 2 tablespoons of basil, but it called for fresh, so I'm not going to quite do 2 tablespoons. We'll just do, sprinkle some in. All right. So add milk and cream cheese. Okay, so Now, let's stir it all together. All right, this recipe also calls for milk and cream cheese, but those things are not added until after you've cooked some. So those things will be added on the night that you make this for dinner. And again, you know, I showed you how big our chicken breasts are, so I'm going to cut them into smaller pieces so that we can have reasonable pieces of chicken. And throw them in the bag. And then we'll throw this marinade in the bag with them. And then on the night that you make it, you also serve it over spaghetti noodles. So while it's cooking in your Instapot, you would make your spaghetti noodles on the stove. Throw in your chicken and let's dump all that in. Here is your bruschetta. So for this bruschetta chicken, it's a very similar recipe. So we're gonna take and cut up our chicken and divide it. Mix up our marinade, throw it in. And this one doesn't get served over spaghetti. So this is something you could serve, you know, with a side dish instead. Maybe a salad, some other things. So we're gonna throw our chicken in here. So we need garlic. We're gonna do 3 cloves. One, two, 3. Two, and number 3. Then 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. And where did I put it? Yeah, there it is. 1, that's a half, so 2, 3, 4. Then 1/3 cup of olive oil. This can's empty, so let's throw that away. Sea salt. It's a 1/2 teaspoon. Some pepper. Sun-dried tomatoes, this time wherever they went. Hold on and I'll find them. Oh, over here. This time they did not tell us to drain them, so we're gonna put them in there with the oil and throw away the jar. And then basil. And we already have our chicken in there. We are good to go. Stir it all up. Pour it in. And it's our second type of bruschetta chicken. Okay, so this one is buttermilk herb chicken, and so basically all you're going to do is throw all the ingredients in the bag and then throw it in the freezer. So you need 2 pounds of boneless skinless chicken breasts, and I've already cut them up. It says quartered, so you don't want giant pieces. So I've got those done. And then you need 1 cup of buttermilk. Pour that in. A tablespoon of honey. Let me get a tablespoon. And actually, let me check and see. Okay, so usually if you have some oil or something like that, you would want to measure that first, because then it makes the honey slide right out. But we don't have any oil going into this recipe, so unfortunately we're gonna have to use our finger to get the honey out. So we're gonna pour that in there, and that's okay because I need to wash my hands anyway. Alright, so we've got our honey in there. Let's wash our hands. And then we need a teaspoon of thyme. And I've already got my, this is a half, so we'll do 1, 2. Then we need a tablespoon of rosemary. Where's the rosemary? Not there. Here it is. I have a tablespoon that's not been used. There's a half. That'll work. Another bottle because that was empty. All right, and then we need a teaspoon of sage and sage. This thing is difficult to get off. So there's and then pepper, salt, and it requires Dijon mustard, which I already told you we won't be doing. Because my family would have a cow if I put Dijon mustard in it. All right, and that is totally packed and ready. So here's our buttermilk chicken. All right, so the next one we're going to do is taco soup, and it calls for ground beef. And remember, we already cooked our ground beef at the beginning, so we're going to dump it all in. And this is kind of too big for me to dump it, so I'll do it with a spoon. That in there. Right, so I have all my ground beef in there. And then I need to add a half a cup of diced onions. Where did I put my onions? There they are. And I've got a quarter of a cup here, so we'll just do that twice. One. Two. I'm going to add some salt, just a little. Some pepper. 3 teaspoons of ranch dressing mix. So this one's a half. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to put a little extra. There we go. Just kind of finish that off. All right. 2 teaspoons of taco seasoning. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now we need some corn. It used canned corn, but I had some frozen, so I just went ahead and figure we'll go with the frozen corn. And we're going to use a whole cup. Diced tomato. There it is. It says 5 1/8 ounce of diced tomatoes. And let me check and make sure, but I believe that's the last of our diced tomatoes. Yes. So I can add all that's left. So dump in our diced tomatoes. And then some diced tomatoes with green chilies we'll get in just a second. We also are supposed to add pinto beans. It does not say to drain them, I guess, so that we will have some more liquid. So we're going to dump those in. And then, it tells us not to add the water until on the night that you're ready to cook it. Let me go and get the diced tomatoes with the green chilies. All right, so I added the diced tomatoes with the green chilies, so we're all good. Zip it up, and on the night you're ready to make it, you just add your water in the pot. So here's your taco soup. So we're gonna make country steak, and what we're gonna do is put all of our steak in here, and then throw in all of our other ingredients. Remember that we cooked our steak earlier, but it's not cooked all the way. It just was basically browned. And so when we cook it later, it'll finish cooking. Put the plate in the sink and let me wash my hands. Okay, so it says that we need to add let's see, a teaspoon of salt, which I'm just gonna add a little bit in here. A little bit of pepper. A tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Here's the spoon we're measuring that with. Make sure we got the right thing. Yes. So this one's a half tablespoon, so we'll do it twice. 1, 2, a half a cup of ketchup. Let's wash out this. Then this one actually calls for 6 garlic cloves. Sounds perfect. Now we need a half a cup of diced onions. And I have my onions here. And my half a cup over here. That's not a half a cup, that's a quarter. Great. It's a quarter, so we'll do it twice. 1. 2. Half a cup of diced celery. 1. And almost 2, so close enough. Then 2 cups of broth. Put that in the sink. And I'm going to get this over here. And here was, let's wash this out. Two cups of beef broth. And that is your country sink.